This is a video tutorial about the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. The stories that I've chosen to do the tutorials on are stories that were really formative for me. And I think a lot of this is a really interesting one. And I think a lot of people have a very visceral reaction to the whole idea of Malcolm X. And I think it comes down to the fact that a lot of people, particularly white people, they would find him really threatening. And they might have heard one or two lines like that he said like by any means necessary or something like that, and they would maybe judge his character based on those few lines. A few years ago, I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine. She dropped me as a friend since then, but at the time we were really good friends. And she was Jewish, and the interesting things that she said, we started having a conversation about. She was trying to write a book about calls of the elders of Zion, which was a text that I had never heard of. And when I said that I'd never heard of this text, she was like, "You never heard of this text?" And I thought, well, no. And it turned out it was like a racist, something really horrible. But she had assumed that I would know all about it, and I think she had also assumed that I would really be as passionate about this story that she wanted to do as I was. And then it turned around because the movie Malcolm X came out, the one directed by Spike Lee. And I asked her, "Oh, aren't you going to go see it?" And she said, "Oh no, I'm not going to go see it." And I was really surprised because I thought it was such an important movie that everybody really, I mean, he was such a historical figure that really everyone should be knowing his story. But it doesn't work that way. And I tried to think about, I thought, why would she be so against it? And I think there's a real danger. There's a real danger of really looking at only as an ethnic group, really looking at our own in our at our own interests exclusively. Uh, Look, the world is getting smaller. People are rubbing shoulders with each other. With it, there's bound to be conflict, but also we need to foster understanding. And in one of the other tutorials, I talked about how literature can give us a vicarious experience of another person's culture, another person's life experience. And I really think that we need to open ourselves up, get beyond our comfort zones, get beyond our comfort zones, and really open up ourselves to the stories of other cultures, even cultures that we have some animosity to or even some prejudice towards. Especially, I would think, the prejudicial cultures. But when I was growing up, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X because in one of the other tutorials I talked about how I looked for literature that was about people of color, because growing up I really felt the difference. It was all about me being brown because back then I didn't wear this. So I really tried to find literature that I could identify with. And so I gravitated to Native American literature and also to Black literature. And when I found the autobiography of Malcolm X, it was probably the first book that featured a person who had become a Muslim. So there was Muslim in there too, which and he was a strong character. He was a strong man. And the funny thing is, like when I was watching Maya Angelou's interview with Oprah, and I was watching other people, even at the end of Spike Lee's movie Malcolm X, he kind of addresses this whole idea of this hesitation on the part of white America to really engage with Malcolm X. And he says at the end, like each of these kids, he has Nelson Mandela saying, "I am Malcolm X," and other people, children, saying, "I am Malcolm X," to kind of get past this whole, yeah, this whole prejudice. What, but Reading this book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, it's actually not a story about a violent man. It's a story about a man who went through horrendous situations growing up. His father was killed by white people. I mean, of course, he's going to grow up with the prejudices that he had. And he was racist. Absolutely, he was racist. And he gravitated, while he was in jail, he gravitated to Elijah Muhammad, who was this black, a kind of a pseudo Muslim. I mean, I really shouldn't judge, but honestly, his teachings had very little to do with Islam. He took some of the things from Islam and he just kind of repackaged it in a way that would appeal to a lot of African Americans. And Elijah Muhammad, to understand a little bit of the history, Elijah Muhammad actually came from Fraud Muhammad, which is an ironic name. His name was Fraud, and he had even they even changed the creed of Islam in their thing. They were not considered Muslims. I mean, they changed the creed to something like there is only one God, and Elijah Muhammad is one of his messenger or something like that, which is like sacrilegious. So, but the fact that he was teaching, he was trying to preach that the white man was actually the devil. And the whole idea of the blue-eyed devil comes from like Elijah Muhammad. So these people, I mean, and if you look at where the blacks were coming from, it was a novel concept. They were so downtrodden. They were still suffering the psychological effects of slavery, of what they had been through. And if you looked at blacks in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they did everything they could to try to present themselves as white as possible. And then through the 60s, which was kind of Malcolm X's real heyday, they started going to the other extreme where they actually tried to emphasize their Africanness. Okay. Now, Malcolm X, he was a product of all of that. So he grew up, in fact, he talks about the section of his life where when he was a real hoodlum and he was a real criminal. And going to jail was probably the thing that saved him. It really saved him. And while in jail, he came across the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, and he embraced them wholeheartedly. He embraced them wholeheartedly. Now you have to also remember that when he was young, Malcolm X was extremely intelligent. Extremely intelligent, but when he told his teacher that he wanted to be a lawyer, the teacher said, "Oh no, no, that's not a realistic occupation for a black child." The teacher said, "Oh, you should probably become a carpenter or something like that." And for a child to be told that by their teacher, and this is someone that they kind of respected and looked up to, it would be devastating. I have, I mean, I don't blame him. Like when you read this book, and the funny thing is, it's written so beautifully. It actually reads like a novel. I am not a big nonfiction reader. Well, I read like a lot of articles and newspaper things and stuff, but I wouldn't say I sit down and I read a nonfiction book very often. But this is one of them that I found gripping. And for especially the boys in the class, it would be a really good choice. It would be a really good choice because of the nonfiction aspect of it. But really, okay, the reason I think it would be a good choice is because it's actually not about a radical man. It's about a man who goes through radicalism. He goes through every aspect of bigotry and racism, as bad as what was perpetrated on him. Not quite. He doesn't have the power to do it back to the white people. But the anger is legitimate. It's there. And he's completely justified in it. But it really is a story about a man who traverses that anger. And what a lot of people don't realize is at the end of his life, just before he was assassinated, when Malcolm X went for Hajj, and at this point he had realized that a lot of Elijah Muhammad, all that stuff was a scam. And in the movie, it's really poignant when he says to the guy, because people have been telling him, hey, this guy's doing all these things, and he didn't listen. He didn't listen, and finally he does look into it, and when he sees the truth, and Malcolm X loved Elijah Muhammad. This was another man who he looked upon as a father and who had guided him. He loved him, and he had to turn his back, and and in fact, he was expelled from the Nation of Islam, which was probably the best thing that ever happened to him. It must have been incredibly hard, but he was expelled from the Nation of Islam, and that actually allowed him to find his real way. Okay, because I think many aspects of the Nation of Islam were very cult-like, and it was the best thing that could have happened that he was able to distance himself from that. And then he did a remarkable thing. He went for pilgrimage, and at the pilgrimage, Malcolm X talks about how he sat down on Hajj. He sat down with the whitest, bluest eyed Muslims. I mean, he had thought in his mind that Muslims, like, we're brown, and a lot of people think that. But really, Muslims have no race, okay? We're everything. We're white, black, brown, you name it. We're all colors. So he had sat and at the same, uh, you know, eating space, and shared a cup with a white man who had the bluest eyes, and he saw the brotherhood that the Hajj really brings out in people. And I mean, this brotherhood is there. Like, when you go for the Hajj, it is like, well, now it's like 5 million people from around the world, every corner of the world. They even have Japanese Muslims now and everything like that. So you share this experience with people from all around the world, and you're all Muslim and everything like that. That changed him. So this is a story of a person who went through he went through everything. He went through radicalization. He went through violence. He went through everything. And he emerged as a human. Yes, he's flawed, but he emerged with a better understanding of the brotherhood of man. A lot of people don't realize the complete transformation that this man went through. And unfortunately, he died very soon after he got back from Hajj. Within a couple of months, he was assassinated. And I guess I find it really intriguing. And I think a lot of white people would find it. Well, why do you have to choose Malcolm X when you have Martin Luther King? The thing is, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X are two sides of the same coin. They both had the same objective, and that was to give African American people their rights. Okay, because they were really, really downtrodden. I mean, slavery was officially ended, but it wasn't really. Okay, so they both had the same objectives, and Martin Luther King came at it from more of a Gandhi approach, and Malcolm X, he was the more tough, angry kind of approach. And I think there's actually room for both approaches. And Martin Luther King, I mean, Malcolm X, in terms of his moral integrity, I think it was head and shoulders above Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King was a real womanizer. I mean, he preached, but he had his babes on the side. I mean, that's well documented. Whereas Malcolm X, he was like, I mean, he was a real player but once he married Betty Shabazz, that was it. He was like monogamous. He was faithful. And there's an interesting scene in the movie, in Spike Lee's movie, where the guy, the FBI agent, is listening, and he says, "This guy's like a priest. Like, he's clean. He makes Martin Luther King look terrible." But that's not the issue. That's not the issue I'm trying to make. I think that the white establishment, it honored Martin Luther King because he was less threatening. So he was less threatening. He said, "Oh, I have a dream," and he was like for nonviolence. But the thing is that you have to remember that in this situation, I mean, is it really fair that the white establishment has the power, has the arms to do whatever they want to the black minority, the people under its rule? They have the power to do whatever they want, and they are not allowed to rise up and say, no, we will not take this, you know. And they are not allowed to have the guns. They are not allowed to fight back against oppression. They're supposed to turn the other cheek. Okay, so I think white establishment felt more comfortable with Martin Luther King's approach, and as a result, they canonized him and they kind of dismissed Malcolm X, which I think it's not fair. I think it's not fair, and I think it's sad. But irregardless of all of that political stuff, this is a fantastic read. It's the transformation of a person who goes from, oh man, just like the biggest hoodlum, to a man of honor and integrity who is willing to sacrifice his life for his ideals and principles. It is an amazing book, and I hope that you will consider exposing the students in your classroom to it. I think that it would leave them changed. And again, it would provide so many interesting talking points, so many interesting discussions. You could have debates back and forth about about the significance of all the things that happen in the book. Okay, and really, yeah, it's just an amazing story. And I think that the more amazing stories that we expose our students to, the better. The better. It'll really make them think, and we want them to learn how to think. Thank you for listening to this tutorial. I'm hoping that you will check out the other tutorials. The next one I want to tackle is To Kill a Mockingbird, which is ironic because yeah, it's ironic because it's a completely different story, but I loved it just as much as I loved Malcolm X, like the autobiography about Malcolm X. So I'll be talking about To Kill a Mockingbird, probably the next one. We'll see.